I have a Minolta MC Rokkor-PF 55mm f1.9 lens here that I'm going to be disassembling. This is one of the cheaper Rokkor lenses. It was included as a kit lens on some of the cheaper cameras. And compared to the 1.7, also 55mm PF, they look very similar on the front, but the design of the body is very different. The 1.9 has this metal rubber gripping rim, more like the later Rokkors, which had the black metal or the black gripping rings instead. And it's also got a few cheaper components, like this name ring up here is plastic versus metal on this one. And then obviously the optics are a slight bit smaller as well. So this particular copy of the lens has some oil on the blade, so it's not, here I can move the aperture blades back and forth, but they're not responding well because you can see there's a bit of oil on them. So what I'm going to be doing is disassembling this lens to be able to clean the blades and also be able to clean all the external body sections because there's a lot of grime in here in the aperture control ring, on the focusing ring, and on the body. So the first thing I'm going to do is go in from the front of the lens and get access to the front of the aperture blades. And this lens has a name ring going around here, this black metal or this black plastic ring with two little holes for where you could try to use a spanning wrench. But because this is plastic, I've found that using a spanning wrench usually isn't necessary. You can actually just grab this and turn the entire thing around and just unscrew that without using the spanning wrench. There, take that out. And now you can see the focusing ring down here and the front glass group. The front glass group has two rings, a black ring in the center here, which has four little divots for a spanning wrench, and then an outer metal ring, which has two divots for a spanning wrench. And you want to unscrew the outer ring to actually remove the entire group rather than just the front glass element. So I'm going to use a spanning wrench and just undo just the entire front group. Okay, and now you can see that I have access to the front of the aperture blades, and you can actually see some of the oil on there a little bit better. Now what I'm going to do is get access to the other side of the aperture blades so you can really clean them much more thoroughly. So I'm going to flip the lens over and focus it all the way out to infinity. And now you can see that on the back lens element here, there's a little black ring with two spots for the spanning wrench, and that's just going to undo the entire back lens group as well. Now I have access to both sides of the aperture blades. You can see that they're not moving very well. They kind of do move, but they're very sluggish, and the stop down lever doesn't really work. So this is definitely something we want to try to fix. So you can actually clean the aperture blades while they're still in the main lens body, but it's a little bit more challenging. And on this particular lens, it's so easy to remove the entire aperture mechanism that that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to lift the entire thing out so it can be cleaned much better. So there's this black ring here, which has the serial number and also moves in and out when you focus the lens. And I'm just going to remove that. It's held in place by these three screws here. And now you can see the next level of the lens has the aperture control mechanism all in here, and then the focusing ring on the outside here. So the black screws here hold the focusing ring in place, while these four screws in here are what are actually holding the aperture control mechanism in the lens. So I'm going to undo those four screws to just lift this entire mechanism out. Okay, so that entire thing just lifts right out like that. So I'm just going to sit the aperture control mechanism to the side for a moment and continue on with the disassembly of the main lens body. Flipping over the lens, you can see on the mounting plate there are these, I think there's 4 screws on this inner black ring going around here, and then 3 screws on this silver ring going around here. And the only ones you need to remove the mounting plate are these 4 inner ones. And I'm just going to remove those and then lift off the entire mounting plate. I'm just going to set this entire piece aside for now, but I'm going to disassemble a little more later to remove this silver ring and be able to clean that. Next, I'm going to remove the aperture control ring, which is this silver ring here going around on the lens. There's nothing holding it in place. The only thing to note is that there's a little ball bearing over on this area here that provides the clicking sound when you move this back and forth. So I'm just going to lift this up, and the ball bearing is right down there. I'm going to set that and the ball bearing aside to be cleaned later. Now this is what's left is the focusing mechanism and the focusing ring, and then this last body section, this one here with the depth of field scale. And what I'm going to do is remove these 2 last body sections so that they could be cleaned individually. And to start with, I'm going to remove this back section, the one with the depth of field scale on it. And it has these 4 screws here that go around and attach that. And now I just have the focusing ring and the focusing mechanism. The focusing ring, once you remove it, there's nothing that locks it in place, so we would have to go back and refocus it to infinity. But I'm going to just remove this and kind of cheat and guess where it's going to go. But for the proper reassembly, once you disattach the focusing ring, you would have to go outside and focus the lens correctly to infinity. So the focusing ring is held in place by these 3 black screws there, there, and there. Okay. These do have little washers on them as well, these little screws. So what I have now is all the individual body sections separate from the mechanical and the optical pieces of the lens. So I can actually go in and clean these pretty well. I don't have to worry about getting any cleaning. I don't have to worry about messing up the glass or messing up the mechanical pieces inside while I'm cleaning these. And what I also have is access to all the mechanical pieces that I need. So I have access to the focusing mechanism, which is right here, and to this silver ring on the back in the mounting plate, which is right here, and to the aperture or the diaphragm assembly, which I'm actually going to clean out in a moment. But going back to this mounting plate, there's one last thing I want to take off. You can see on this other side of the mounting plate, this is the stop down lever over right here. And that's what's actually coupling to the aperture. But I want to just remove this last externally visible piece, this silver ring going around. And there are just 3 screws holding it in place, there, there, and there. And I'm just going to clean that off as well. So if the lens is having trouble, the aperture is not opening and closing properly, chances are there's probably something either wrong with the diaphragm assembly, this piece, like there's oil on the blades or something's not quite right in there, or there's something wrong with the mounting plate assembly, which I removed here. So there'd be friction or something lodged in here that would be preventing it from mechanically working. Maybe one of these springs here, these little wires, have stopped working. But in this case, I already know what's wrong. I know there's oil on the aperture blades. And rather than disassemble this and try to put it back together, I'm actually just going to demonstrate how you would clean this in place. So I'm just going to clean all these blades while they're still inside the mechanism here and demonstrate how that is done. So what I'm going to do to clean this is I'm going to use a solution of isopropyl alcohol here, some Q-tips, and then a little blowing thing, air blower. to just carefully clean off the Aperture blades. So I'm going to try to clean off the oil, and then because the isopropyl alcohol will evaporate quickly, it's not going to leave any marks, it's not going to damage anything, hopefully. I probably wouldn't use it on the optical pieces, but for this it's going to work really well. And the only thing that I have to be careful about is that these blades are so thin that you really can't put a lot of weight on them. So you have to be very careful when you're cleaning this that you don't actually press down in here. What you're actually trying to do more is just transfer the isopropyl alcohol up to the lens blades and then work this back and forth just by moving this lever over here. Work it back and forth and then kind of dab off the remaining cleaning solution and use the air blower to get off any of the other stuff and make sure the entire thing's dry before we put it back together. So I'm just going to start, go in, apply a little bit where I can kind of see the oil, a little bit more, and then just work this back and forth a little to kind of get it all throughout there. I'm going to go in on the back side as well, do the same kind of thing, just very carefully. I'm going with the direction of these little pedal things because it's a lot easier this way. You don't have to worry as much about bending these if you go in the same direction. I'm going to switch Q-tips because that one's got some oil on it now. And just work this back and forth again. And kind of clean this off at all the different aperture openings that I can get access to. And when I close it up, it's going to look pretty, so it's going to be pretty dry looking right now, and then I'll close it up and there's going to be more of the solution that's kind of gathered over to the sides, and that also has a lot of the oil and other stuff in it. So I want to kind of try to mop that up. Okay, now that I've kind of got a lot of that visible oil gone, I'm just going to keep on going in with a little bit of the cleaning solution and working this back and forth until I don't see any more oil on the blades and things start moving a little more smoothly. You can also use the blower at this point to actually kind of force some of the cleaning solution out. Things are looking a little better. It's still not moving smoothly because it's wet, so I have to dry it out a little more to see if I made any improvement. So that's looking a lot better, but I'm going to do a little more work. You can see that there's kind of this pattern on there now from where the oil evaporated, and mostly that's just cosmetic since the blades are moving pretty smoothly. It's not actually that you're removing the coating on the blades or anything, it's more so that the oil and other things has just been dispersed and there's impurities in the cleaning solution that when it evaporates it kind of leaves those behind. So you can work a little bit more, like I can go in and try to clean those up a little bit better. And the way I'm doing that is I'm just applying a little bit more cleaning solution and then mopping it up with a Q-tip right away instead of kind of letting it sit on there and evaporate. You can also use the air blower to go in and kind of force it off the blades, and that often works a little better. So what I want to do at this point, I think I'm done with the cleaning. I just want to make sure that this is completely dried out and that there's no more of the cleaning solution or anything like that still left in there. And that's pretty easy with an alcohol-based cleaning solution because it will just evaporate very quickly on its own. And I'm also going to go and just remove some of this extra oil that was around here on the top. It's probably not going to be any problem or cause any problems, but I might as well do that while I'm here. It's not really helping anything. What I want to check for is that the aperture is still the proper shape, that none of the blades have been bent, and that it moves smoothly back and forth as well. And it does seem to be doing both of those. So before starting the reassembly, I'm going to actually clean off all these body sections. It's the aperture control ring, the silver mounting plate ring that I removed, the depth of field scale ring, and then the focusing ring. And each of these, they can actually be just cleaned in with soap and water or some other cleaning solution. You can just go in with a toothbrush or a soft toothbrush or some sort of brush and just clean the things in here. The only thing you want to be careful of is that once you put them back in, they need to be fully dry so that there's not any moisture going back into the lens. So I'm just going to go and take these and clean them off and bring them right back. So with the body pieces all cleaned and dried off, I'm going to start with the reassembly. And I'm going to start by putting back the aperture control mechanism into the focusing ring. So on this focusing ring, there's this little slot in the intersection over here where a post will go. And on the aperture control mechanism, there's a little flat surface. And those two should line up, and then there are the 4 screw holes going around that also will line up once those two are lined up. I'm just going to those lined up and then go with the 4 screws. Next, I'm going to reattach this back section here, which has the depth of field scale on it. And the way I'm going to reattach this is it's just going to slide on top of the, let me see here, it's going to slide on top of this, the focusing mechanism, but it has this post here, this metal post that has to go into that groove that I just installed. So I'm going to just line that up and then line up the 4 screw holes going around and install this. Now I'm going to reattach the aperture control ring. And for this, it's going to slide on top of this back body section with this little sticking out thing here going into this part of the aperture control mechanism. So let me stop this down so you can kind of see a little better what this actually happens. But when it slides on, it goes into this forked section of the aperture control mechanism over like here, and opens and closes the aperture when it moves back and forth. And there'll be a spring that actually holds this shut automatically, but right now there's not. That's in the mounting plate. So that's how it's going to work. And then there's the ball bearing down here on this lower section, right below the depth of field scale. One thing is that because we cleaned off the different body sections and actually washed them off, some of the oil may this focusing mechanism may not turn as smoothly. This one looks like it's pretty good, but oftentimes you may need to apply a little bit of grease going around here in this inner ring where the aperture control ring sits. And what that will do is just facilitate this turning a little bit more smoothly if it got a little rough because of the lack of lubricant before. And the only thing is that you want to use a very minor amount of lubricant, and then also one that's not going to get runny at high temperatures, something like a silicon base that's not going to run at high temperatures. To make my job a little bit easier, I'm going to just remove the little section here on the aperture control ring, the little post. So I only have to get the ball bearing in first, and then I can do the posts separately. You can try to get the post lined up and then also get the ball bearing lined up, but that's a little bit harder to do properly. So I'm going to put the ball bearing in its little slot right there, and then get the grooves on top of it. Kind of just place that on top, and I think yeah, there. I have to retry that. Okay. And I can check that it's clicking properly, and that looks good. And now I can just reinstall this other piece that I took out before. As I mentioned, you can do that. You can try to do both of these steps at the same time. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult. Okay, now you can check that. Here, let me stop down the aperture. That this is closing and opening properly. There shouldn't be any blades visible when it's fully open. And that's really what you want to check for. And like I said, there's going to be a little spring that actually holds this stop down lever over here. Now I'm just going to install the back mounting plate, which is going to sit on top of here, and it has this stop down lever on the outside as well. And if you look on the back of this, there's a little, it moves this inner crescent shaped metal piece, which has a little pocket here. And that's what actually goes around the stop down lever here. So this is what actually provides the spring mechanism so that it slides back fully open by default. So what you want to have lined up is you want to get the stop down lever on the aperture control mechanism aligned to the one out out here. And the way to do that is to have this fully opened, and then you're also going to need to line up the 4 screws going around here, but really you just need to get the aperture or the step down levers locked in place first. So I'm going to kind of get those lined up, and then I can just rotate this until I find where the screws need to be. It's right there. Now I'm going to reinstall the 4 inner screws. Remember, I took off that silver ring as well, which had 3 screws, but these are the 4 inner screws. And I'm going to just put back on. And now I'm just going to reinstall that silver ring. I think this is just mainly cosmetic. It has the 3 screws going around here, here, and here, and the orientation of this doesn't really matter. And to complete the reassembly of the back of the lens, I'm going to put back in the back glass group. So it just screws in place, and then you can lock it down with the spanning wrench to get it a little bit tighter. There we go. And the reason I kind of did things in a different order for the reassembly than the disassembly is because I need to focus the lens back to infinity. And on this lens, it's particularly easy. All I have to do is install the last front glass piece, which it just screws in place, and then I'll do that right now. Just screws in place like this. And now I have the entire front of the lens with the exception of the focusing ring and the black metal ring that goes on the front, kind of the one that holds the filter. And what the focusing ring does, it's the one that goes on first, and it's what we need to correctly lock to the inner focusing mechanism here. It has a little black bar here, which is actually what limits the extent of how far you can turn this in either direction. So this is just going to slide on to here for now, and it's just going to turn freely about. But it should be locking or clicking in the 2 directions so that it's hitting 1.75 and infinity. So now what I'm going to do is just get the 3 screws that go in the focusing ring and their little washers in place, but I'm not going to tighten them down yet. This can be a little bit challenging sometimes. So you can do this step before you insert this diaphragm mechanism here, and that's sometimes a lot easier because you have more space to work with. But in this case, I thought the it made more sense for a demonstration to show this order. So now I want to just loosen these up a slight bit so that this still turns freely. So this lens is incredibly easy to focus back to infinity. Now that I have this ring turning loosely, what you would do is mount this on your camera. You can see that I have the complete mount with all the optics and everything in there. So mount this as it is on your camera and go outside to somewhere where you have an object in the far distance. And then with this mounted on your camera, you would use the viewfinder and turn this inner ring here, this silver brass ring, and you can kind of use the screws to actually turn it back and forth. So it should just turn freely independently of this focusing ring. You can also kind of lock this down and then use the focusing ring and then free this up. But what you want to do is have this focused correctly to infinity on the camera. So you want to have it in focus at infinity. And I'm just going to kind of find a spot where I know it's close. So you actually don't want to have this exactly at infinity when it's set to infinity. Now I'm going to lock this down because it's kind of close. What you want to have is it a little bit past infinity so that when you focus out to infinity, you have to focus back. So something like this and then that's infinity. And the reason you would do that is because if things shift around mechanically, which they probably shouldn't, but or if there's like temperature and the lens is expanding or contracting, if you have this so that the furthest setting is infinity and things shift around, you'll never be able to focus past there, so it's actually going to be out of focus at infinity. Where if this is infinity and then things shift around, you can actually go past it a little bit, and that's much more helpful. So just to finish off the reassembly, I'm going to focus all the way in and put on this front ring here. Just has the 3 screws going around. And with that all set, I'm going to reattach the nameplate. Alright, so this lens is really easy to take apart. You can get access to the Aperture blades in like less than 5 minutes easily, and you can really take the entire thing apart in probably 15 minutes and get it all cleaned. So it's very easy to take apart, easier even than the Minolta 1.7. The construction is a little bit cheaper, but it's certainly not a cheap construction. It's still pretty well made, even with a few plastic components. So it's a pretty easy lens to take apart and repair.